that the norms of restraint which have held fragile peace together are being abandoned. The strike on Doha was not just a military act, it was a message, a provocation, and a stark warning that the conflict is now moving into dangerous new territory. The region stands at a point where stability, painstakingly maintained through diplomacy and economic cooperation, can unravel in a matter of hours. Consider what this escalation means for ordinary people. Families in Qatar, a nation long known as a mediator and diplomatic hub, now live under the shadow of fear. The idea that no city, no matter how globally connected or politically neutral, is safe from attack is profoundly destabilizing. It disrupts not only the physical safety of citizens, but also the very fabric of trust that societies need to function. If Doha can be targeted, then what does that mean for other capitals across the Middle East? What does it mean for the businesses, universities, and international organizations that have chosen Qatar as a base for dialogue and cooperation? The chilling reality is that escalation transforms civilian spaces into potential battlegrounds, erasing the distinction between war zones and cities once considered safe. This act also poses a direct threat to regional stability because Qatar is not an isolated player. It is an energy powerhouse, a diplomatic broker, and a vital link in the chain of global commerce. Any disruption to Qatar's stability is felt not only in the Middle East, but across Europe, Asia, and beyond through rising energy prices, disrupted supply chains, and weakened platforms for negotiation. By striking at the heart of Doha, those who chose violence are effectively saying that the interconnected global economy and the diplomatic efforts of countless nations are expendable. Such reckless behavior cannot be dismissed as a local matter. It reverberates in boardrooms, parliaments, and households worldwide. The escalation also feeds into a wider regional dynamic that is already volatile. Tensions between Israel and its neighbors, the ongoing instability in Gaza, the fragile situation in Lebanon, and the deepening polarization across the Arab world all converge to create a tinderbox. The strike on Qatar is not an isolated spark. It is part of a broader firestorm of aggression, provocation, and lawlessness. When one nation crosses the line of striking a capital, others may feel emboldened to do the same. Retaliation becomes not only likely, but almost inevitable. And with every retaliatory act, the chances of diplomacy shrink while the risk of uncontrollable conflict grows. What makes this escalation particularly perilous is the absence of effective global intervention. Where is the international community when such acts occur? Where are the mechanisms that were supposed to prevent capital cities from becoming legitimate targets? The failure to respond decisively invites more of the same, encouraging further violations and making restraint seem like weakness. This is why the strike on Qatar cannot be...
Even because of the United States' strangeness of behavior right now. For example, China and India, which have been at loggerheads for 60 years, for more than that, for almost 80 years, for a complicated reason that the British drew an arbitrary borderline in the Himalayas, and that has meant border dispute and conflict between China and India since India gained independence in 1947, and the People's Republic of China was formed in 1949, and they're still fighting over a line that a guy named McMahon drew arbitrarily in 1880, never having been up to the Himalayas where he drew the line. And there is, by the way, a theorem that I kind of subscribe to, that all problems in the world go back to the British. So that's true in the Middle East, it's true in the Himalayas, it's true in much of the world. Yes, it's true all over Africa. It is actually a very good rule of thumb. It's not quite a proven theorem, but it's a very good rule of thumb. In any event, the Indian and Chinese foreign ministers got together and said, what are we fighting about? We should trade more, we should invest more. And then very positive statements came from Prime Minister Modi and from President Xi. Then last week, 3 other countries that are at loggerheads for no reason in the world, honestly, China, Korea, and Japan. They are divided because the United States says, you're on our side and they're the enemy, to China and Japan, and to Korea and Japan vis-a-vis China. The 3 got together because they see the U.S., not such a great protector of their interests, and they said, we need to improve relations with each other. This is very, very good. And if you think about Iran and Saudi Arabia, for example, which was defined by the U.S. to be the fundamental schism of Shia and Sunni, and so much of U.S. policy was playing the Sunnis against Shia, Iran, and so forth. They made a rapprochement last year, which China helped to broker in a very wise way. The United States would never have done it and never even have thought about it, but China was very helpful. So truly, I'm not so pessimistic at all. I just see the world changing, and I can understand the pessimism in the newspapers that I happen to read in the U.S., because they're all geared around the idea of the U.S. as number one. And if you put that aside, I like a world in which China's playing a much larger role, and India's playing a much larger role, and the African Union's playing a much larger role, and Saudi Arabia's playing a much larger role. To me, this is a great world. It's a world of diversity, much better food, much better conversation, much better places to visit, much more fun in conferences and meetings and problem solving and all the rest. But if you just happen to be a U.S. strategist, it looks very grim and dangerous and so forth. So I don't buy into the danger part. I do buy into the danger part for the reasons I said, but I don't buy into the inevitability of crisis. So what I would really like you guys to do is to stay on the networking course and the practical course and the problem-solving course. And I want us to help you to do that. And just to be very clear, SDSN Youth is not to empower youth per se. It's to help solve global problems, of which you have a lot of solutions. So that's a little bit different. We have a little more access than you do to some places, being older and gray hair, but you know how to fix our phones and computers a lot better than we do, and what's going on with the latest apps and how to use them and so forth. And that's actually unique knowledge in our world right now. And so it's really important that you're at the table. It's true, you should be at the table for 2 reasons. One, to protect the interests of your generation against 78-year-old U.S. presidents that don't know how to think ahead. So that's true, but I don't think that's the main reason you should be at the table. The main reason you should be at the table is you can help move this agenda forward in a very significant way. So I had good experience when I was young. I luckily thrust into places where I could do something at an early stage of my career. And thank God it worked, because otherwise that would have been the end of it. But in any event, you can do a lot. But I also know we can help you too, because you learn a lot actually along the way as well. Every day I learn something that I say, I cannot believe I didn't know that for the last 50 years of trying to know what I know. And pretty fundamental stuff every day, which is weird to me actually, because by now it should be kind of rote, but it's not rote at all. There's just so much to learn. And I kind of walk around my...
Be viewed simply as another headline in the endless news cycle. It must be recognized as a pivotal moment, a test of whether the world will allow aggression to set the rules, or whether it will reaffirm its commitment to peace and law. We must also recognize the psychological impact of such escalation. Striking a capital city is not only about military objectives, it is about instilling fear, about demonstrating that no one is beyond reach. It is a strategy designed to undermine confidence in governments, to make citizens feel vulnerable, and to pressure leaders into rash decisions. This is where escalation becomes most dangerous, for when fear dictates policy, diplomacy is abandoned, and war becomes inevitable. Qatar, like many nations, has invested in diplomacy as a shield against conflict. Yet this strike is a brutal reminder that diplomacy alone cannot survive without the backing of enforceable international law. The hook that must capture the world's attention is simple yet stark. If this can happen in Doha, it can happen anywhere. If the international community tolerates the targeting of one capital, then the precedent is set for others. What city will be next? Riyadh, Ankara, Tehran? Even beyond the Middle East, the normalization of striking civilian and diplomatic centers threatens to rewrite the rules of engagement in ways that leave no nation immune. This escalation is not just about Qatar, not just about the Middle East. It is about whether the global system is strong enough to protect us all from sliding into a future of permanent insecurity. The danger of escalation lies not only in the immediate violence, but in the chain reaction it sets in motion. Once lines are crossed, they are rarely redrawn. The strike on Qatar has moved the region into a darker, more unstable phase, and unless decisive action is taken, the spiral of conflict will only accelerate. The world must understand that escalation is not contained. It spreads, it infects, and it destroys the fragile webs of cooperation and trust upon which our collective safety depends. The violation of sovereignty and international law through the strike on Qatar's capital is not merely an isolated breach of conduct. It is a fundamental attack on the very principles that keep nations from sliding into endless cycles of violence. Sovereignty is the cornerstone of modern international relations. It is the idea that every state, large or small, powerful or modest, has the right to govern itself, to protect its people, and to conduct its affairs free from external aggression. When that principle is violated, it is not just the targeted state that suffers, the entire global order trembles. Qatar's capital was not struck in a vacuum. It was struck in defiance of the most basic norms that the international community has pledged to uphold. To target a capital city is to cross a threshold that civilized nations agreed long ago should remain protected. These are not military outposts or battlefield positions. Capitals represent the heart of governance, diplomacy, and the civic life of a people. An attack on such a place is an assault on diplomacy itself. Embassies sit there, international organizations reside there, and countless civil ladies and gentlemen, distinguished colleagues, and fellow citizens of the world. Let me begin by saying this: history is knocking at our door, and the choices we make in the coming weeks will echo for generations. We are standing at a crossroads where reason, diplomacy, and respect for law are being tested against arrogance, violence, and disregard for humanity. The question before us is not only about Israel and its actions, not only about Qatar and the risks of escalation, but about whether the international system we have built since the Second World War can still protect us from sliding into chaos. If we fail to answer this challenge, then lawlessness becomes the new normal, and every nation, every people will live under permanent threat. The recent strike targeting Qatar's capital represents not only an escalation in an already volatile region, but also a dangerous precedent that should alarm the entire world. Let us be clear, Qatar is not a battlefield. It is a sovereign nation, a hub of diplomacy, energy, and commerce, and an essential player in the international community. An attack on its capital is not just an act of aggression. It is an assault on the very principles of sovereignty and stability. This reckless act signals that the region is sliding away from negotiation tables and into the abyss of tit for tat violence, dragging countless innocent lives into its storm. The escalation of conflict in the Middle East, marked most recently by the strike on Qatar's capital, has placed the entire region on the edge of a precipice. This is not merely another episode in a cycle of violence that has haunted the region for decades. It is a deeply alarming shift with far-reaching consequences that extend far beyond the Gulf. When a capital city, home to embassies, international organizations, global businesses, and millions of civilians, is targeted, it signals that
and a complexity longer than governments know how to do. So if you want to change the energy system, it's not a 1 year or a 5 year or a 10-year process. You really have to be able to think about 25 years or 30 years and basic changes of technology and learn how to put that into a real political process and so forth. And this is what I find most governments don't know how to do effectively. Again, China is better at planning in this way than any other government that I know among the major governments. Europe's not bad at setting goals, but it then doesn't necessarily actually create the planning to deliver them very effectively. I'll say also I have huge hopes, expectations, and demands of the African Union in the coming years. There's a new AU commission that just came into office on March 15, and Africa needs to make a breakthrough in the next 30 years. It can't go on like this with many conflicts, with kids not in school, with the systems not working, with electricity not reaching still hundreds of millions of people. And that's what we were discussing in the Financing for Development workshop that we had earlier this week, how to make those breakthroughs. So one thing I'm asking of you is helping to instill the idea of really basic transformation in your countries, regions, and since we're going to do it together at a world scale, that yes, we really can create a better future, and it's not only wish fulfillment, it's actually very practical work. For me, by the way, I caught who had a slide that I think Sinead, about the importance of education as being absolutely fundamental. Was that you, Sinead? Yeah. In any event, okay. There are probably 300 million kids not even in school right now. And we have to absolutely say, no, are you kidding? Not another school year like this. This is crazy. And the reason they're not in school, in some places, is because of conflict and displacement. But for at least 200, 250 million kids, it's because the governments don't have the funds to hire teachers, to have the schools, and so forth. And I want to have a fit together with you to the powers that be that this cannot go on any longer. You cannot leave kids out of school in this world. Let me spend just a few minutes talking about the situation in the world right now, because the last couple of days have been dramatic. Now, there is no guarantee that we avoid catastrophe because the world's not well led, and the world is in a very unstable situation because of all the things that we've been discussing. Of course, the climate crisis, all of the upheavals in the world economy, even aside from the interventions of leaders choosing wrong things. Just the technological upheavals are astounding, and you know that better than I. So this is something quite dramatic. But another thing that's very dramatic is the geopolitical changes that are underway. They are remarkable. They're very dangerous, but on the whole, not bad, actually. What's happening is that a familiar world led, so-called, by the United States and Europe is no longer led by the United States and Europe. It was presumptuous to be led by the United States and Europe to begin with. It's actually the end of a very long cycle that dates back to 1492 and onward, because it started with a voyage that was a little bit went awry and changed the world fundamentally. And they say that, how do you know that Christopher Columbus was an economist, by the way? He didn't know where he was going. He didn't know where he was when he got there, and it was all on a government grant. So this is par for the course. But the world became a European-led world that you don't know what you're seeing with your own eyes about things that can be done. So that's really the balance that's extremely important. Now, what's going to happen after 2030? Let me say a few words about that, because you're going to play a big role in that. Obviously, we're not going to achieve what we set out to achieve in 2015, September 25th, 2015, when Pope Francis ushered in the Sustainable Development Goals at the UN. The agenda was pretty optimistic beforehand. At the time, it was very stretched goals. it would have required a lot of capacity and working together to make them happen. Of course, we just didn't get the major powers to work very hard on any of this. The only one that made a major effort, in my view, was China, actually. Europe said a few things at the beginning, but Europe got caught in this Ukraine war, which, to my mind, was just a disastrous mistake because the United States doesn't know how to make peace, and blew the chance after 1991 to help create a true collective security arrangement in Europe. Instead, it expanded NATO. But I don't want to go there. Just to say, the US didn't try, Europe didn't try very much. China launched the Belt and Road Initiative, which is a very big and positive thing. Africa launched the African Continental Free Trade Area, which is a very important thing and a very positive development. But the world as a whole, for the major powers, didn't try very hard. So we're reaching, and I don't want to go into it, but my view is the US at the University of North Carolina concocted something called SARS-CoV-2 and made a pandemic. That's another long story. But we just lost a lot of time. So what are we going to do? My hope, personally, and this is something we can discuss longer, is that we continue under the framework of the Sustainable Development Goals. And the reason is it's taken 10 years to have governments understand a bit about how to make such a complicated, multidimensional programming process, because it's not simple to do this, to plan for 17 major objectives, long-term planning, strategy, and so forth. Now, the goals won't stay exactly the same, but I don't want to redo everything to have a new set of goals and a new framework, because honestly, to my mind, it may be constructive in bringing new voices in, to be sure, so I don't want to rule out deliberations which will take place, but I don't think we should throw out everything, because it just would be a major loss and time sink. And in our world today, the US will walk away from the table anyway, and it just may be very hard to get a framework, other framework. So I'm hoping we continue under this broad rubric, resetting, adding, no doubt, something about artificial intelligence as SDG 18, or repackaging some of the objectives and so on, but to keep this framework to mid-century, because the next period, to my mind, is to 2050, is to mid-century. And that's, in fact, what we need to decarbonize the energy system. It's what we need to transform agriculture. It's what we need to create a workable digital society in which good things rather than bad things happen with these new technologies and so forth. So that's what I think what I am going to be aiming for in the next few years. This will probably be decided more or less around 2027 or 2028. So there will be a UN process. The next Secretary General will assign a commission, probably. There'll be deliberations. You'll be involved in national level and global processes and youth ambassadors in many ways. And we should really strategize together about this, and you should make further outreach to other groups in order to do this. One basic point is that what makes all of this very hard is thinking ahead on a time horizon.
Billion lives depend on the sense of security that a capital is meant to provide. By shattering that security, the aggressor sends a dangerous message that no space is sacred, no institution is safe, and no agreement is binding. This erodes not only the sovereignty of Qatar, but undermines the global belief in boundaries that cannot be violated. The United Nations Charter is explicit in prohibiting the use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. Yet, what we see today is a flagrant disregard for this foundational principle. The rules were not designed as mere ideals to be admired. They were crafted out of the bloodshed of the 20th century, when lawlessness and aggression plunged the world into devastating wars. To dismiss them now is to repeat history's darkest mistakes. When a strike on Qatar is allowed without accountability, the charter becomes paper thin, its promises hollow, and its deterrent effect non-existent. What then prevents any other state from pursuing similar acts of aggression against its neighbors? The violation of sovereignty has consequences that ripple far beyond Qatar's borders. Every nation, whether in the Middle East, Africa, Europe, or Asia, relies on the principle of sovereignty as its ultimate protection. Small states, in particular, depend on international law to shield them from the overreach of larger powers. If the international system fails to defend Qatar's sovereignty, what confidence can smaller nations have that they too will be protected when targeted? The normalization of such attacks creates a world where power dictates rights, where legality is irrelevant, and where smaller states become permanent pawns in the games of stronger powers. What makes this violation especially alarming is its brazenness. This was not an ambiguous border clash or an accidental incursion. It was a direct strike on a nation's capital. The symbolism of this act cannot be overstated. It is designed to show contempt for the rules that bind nations together, to flaunt power in the face of law, and to intimidate not only Qatar, but all who might resist. This is why the world cannot afford to treat the incident as just another conflict in a troubled region. It is not a local matter. It is a precedent-setting act with global implications. The hook that should shake every policymaker awake is if sovereignty can be violated so easily in Qatar, then sovereignty can be violated anywhere. Today it is Doha under threat, but tomorrow it could be Brussels, Tokyo, or Nairobi. Once the precedent is set that international law is optional, then no capital, no government, no people can ever feel truly secure again. It is not the size of the state that matters, but the principle of protection that is now at risk. The disregard for sovereignty is also an attack on diplomacy, for how can nations negotiate peace when their very capitals are treated as legitimate targets? Diplomacy thrives on the assumption that states are secure enough to sit at the table, to compromise, to engage in dialogue. Strip away that security and diplomacy collapses under the weight of fear and mistrust. By striking at Qatar's sovereignty, the aggressor has struck at the very heart of peaceful resolution. The world must confront the uncomfortable truth. Law without enforcement is not law at all. It is suggestion. If the international community does not act decisively to reaffirm,
with a lot of cruelty and a lot of inequality and a lot of domination, and with a lot of remarkable technological development that came along with it, but that was utilized as a form of power and oppression as well. And the United States dominated the world for about a half a century after 1945. Now we're in a very different world, and the voices of other parts of the world are really important and growing, and that means that in the media and in the political life in the Western world, there's a lot more anxiety actually than there is in China, for example, or in India, where it's not pessimistic. It's not feeling that the world's falling apart. It's feeling that the world is changing in the right direction, actually. And I would say if you look at opinion surveys in Africa, there's a tremendous amount of optimism, actually. Africa is the most optimistic single continent in the world if you look at opinion surveys. So the world's changing, and it leads to a lot of anxiety, and the anxiety is highest in the United States because nobody likes to be pushed off the perch. But the fact of the matter is the world's becoming a lot more interesting, diverse, interconnected. You're a very diverse group, but not quite diverse enough. Are there any Chinese faces here? No.
We have somebody from Hong Kong.
Okay, good. Hong Kong, we were just there. It's wonderful. And India?
Yes.
Great, okay. So between the two, you're 40% of the world population, but not exactly 40% of this room. So it's just to say, we don't have to have complete demographic equality, but you're a very diverse group, which is extremely important, very important. And the world's even more diverse, if I could put it that way, so we need to strive for that. And viewed in that perspective, my own view is, I'll say a grim statement and then an optimistic statement. If we don't blow things up, which is possible, then things are going to be okay. And by that I mean the world that is taking shape will be more equal, more open, actually benefiting from a lot of the breakthroughs in technology. The real worry I have is just disaster in the short term, because my country is the worst led that it's ever been, and our political system has collapsed. So we have one-person rule, which is not exactly the way to run a society of 335 million people and $30 trillion of output, but that's what we have for the moment. But if we can avoid the catastrophes, we actually, not just rhetorically and not just optimistically, we really have a lot of solutions in this world for food production, for sustainable energy, for better education and healthcare systems, for all sorts of things that are completely wonderful. They're getting discovered, they're getting developed, you're pioneering many of them, they're not getting undertaken at the scale that they need and the pace that they need by any means, but they could be, because there's no fundamental shortfall of resources or know-how. We're not running out of particular minerals so that we can't do this. We're not running out of land so that we're in a struggle for who eats and who doesn't eat. We're not running out of energy because solar radiation is about 5,000 times our power usage on the planet. So if we deploy solar power, which is now cheaper than any other kind of power, we're not in an energy shortage as well. We're not in a know-how shortage, but we are in a fairness shortage. We're in a niceness shortage. We're in a calmness shortage. We're in a geopolitical crisis, and we are with a lot of instability from all of the upheavals of climate, which are going to get worse for the next 50 years, almost no matter what we do, because underlying our physical reality is a lot of warming built into the system and a lot of shocks that will come from that. That doesn't mean that the impacts necessarily get worse, because things can get buffered, we can become more resilient, we can become adapted, but the climate itself is going to become more dangerous shortly. So this is our state of affairs. Now, what specifically happened yesterday was the U.S. Declared itself outside of the world trade system. 2 weeks ago, the U.S. declared itself outside of the climate challenge. 3 weeks ago, the U.S. declared itself out of the sustainability challenge. 4 weeks ago, the U.S. declared itself outside of the WHO. All right. Honestly, it doesn't get dumber than this, really. But the U.S. is 4.1% of the world population. And as I said, the other 95%, I don't see things diminishing in intensity of purpose, but rather increasing. And there are a lot of very good things that are happening.
The inviolability of sovereignty, then the system will continue to erode. And once the system crumbles, rebuilding it will be infinitely harder. The strike on Qatar was more than an act of aggression. It was a test of whether the world still values the rules it claims to defend. The test is ongoing, and failure will not only cost Qatar its peace, but will cost humanity its fragile shield against lawlessness. Israel's growing disregard for international law and its unchecked military actions represent one of the most serious threats, not only to the Middle East, but to the credibility of the global order itself. What we are witnessing is a state operating as if it is beyond accountability, dismissing the very institutions designed to prevent war and protect civilians. This lawlessness has ceased to be a regional concern and has become a global one, because the principle at stake is universal. If one state can openly defy the law with impunity, then what prevents others from doing the same? The unraveling of legal norms anywhere is a danger everywhere. The pattern is by now undeniable. Israel has carried out actions that openly contravene international conventions, targeting civilian areas, violating the sovereignty of neighboring states, ignoring repeated United Nations resolutions demanding compliance with humanitarian and legal standards. Each act chips away at the authority of global institutions, weakening their capacity to protect vulnerable populations elsewhere in the world. It is not simply a matter of Israeli-Palestinian politics. It is about the message being broadcast to every government across the globe that rules can be bent or broken without consequence if one possesses enough military strength or political backing. This is the heart of the danger, the normalization of lawlessness. When Israel dismisses international rulings, it does more than create immediate suffering on the ground. It corrodes the foundation upon which diplomacy and global trust are built. How can smaller nations place faith in the United Nations when they see that resolutions are flouted with no repercussions? How can global leaders speak of justice, equality, or human rights when they permit a state to repeatedly disregard those very values? This erosion of credibility does not stay confined to one region. It spreads across continents, fueling cynicism, feeding extremism, and undermining cooperation on the very issues: climate change, poverty, global security, that require collective action. The hook that the world must confront is this: when Israel is allowed to operate outside the boundaries of law, the international system itself is put on trial. Every act of defiance without accountability delivers a verdict of weakness, proving that our rules-based order is more fragile than we want to admit. If lawlessness prevails in one place, it creates a precedent that can and will be invoked elsewhere. Tomorrow